this period there is discussion about reassessing who the true winners and losers are. The remarkable Broadcom numbers were made public on Friday. People started to question whether Broadcom was the best option after seeing the gains we achieved. Tim, didn't you think it was more about the perspective? The stats weren't the point. No, it was a beautiful view. Now let's talk about 2027. Everyone can find adequate room. Nvidia is not always replaced by Broadcom. Two businesses that are associated with Nvidia are Marvell and Broadcom. The person you're working with will determine this. Amazon Web Services AWS owns Marvell. Since Nvidia is the only significant GPU supplier, large tech businesses have decided that they must develop their own proprietary processors that are less expensive and operate cooler. They are 3 in number. They're not a game of zeros, but I believe that some people say, you know what, I've got to get off this horse, it's falling. David, that's about it. Let us start by discussing Nvidia, which is listed under the stock symbol NVDA. You are aware of that already. By placing new restrictions on the export of AI chips, the Biden administration is allegedly undermining economic growth and innovation. The regulations, which will take effect in a year, restrict the amount of computer power that may be sold to the majority of nations. In a blog post, Ned Finkel, Vice President of Government Affairs at Nvidia, stated that the proposed Biden regulations will harm America's capacity to compete internationally and the innovation that has put the country at the forefront, rather than lessening risks. A portion of that message is visible. He goes on to say that even if these regulations seem to be directed at China, they won't really help the situation. Global technology, including technology already prevalent in game PCs and consumer electronics, will be impacted by new U.S. securities regulations. This is significant because it could make America less competitive internationally. Hello Brad. I think Nvidia's stated objective, and the information provided by industry insiders are very obvious. They are trying to establish a connection with the Trump administration while looking back, before the Biden administration. The inauguration is in just 1 week. The Trump administration demonstrated that America thrives by sharing technology with the globe and remaining competitive, not by keeping back, according to Nvidia's final statement. Additionally, they expressed their optimism for policies that will strengthen American leadership once more. The Biden administration's actions were swiftly condemned by the Semiconductor Industry Association. They also recommended that new policies be developed by the Trump administration. They are making a concerted effort to gain favor with the new administration in the hopes of enlisting President-elect Donald Trump to maybe amend some of the upcoming legislation, as evidenced by the current screen reaction of almost 4%. This is a significant event for Nvidia. A large portion of this is simply market apprehension about the magnitude and impact of the Chinese response. Who will ultimately bear the consequences of the back-and-forth disputes that may result from some of these exchanges? Who will be most impacted by this in a good or bad way? You should think about the issues at hand because they are keeping a careful eye on the obvious difficulties that lie ahead. Since last week, there has been a decline of almost 11%. We should also mention that this company recently reached a new all-time high last week. This option trading accident. It resulted in the total loss of the entire sales force. Who is more likely to be shut down less than a week hence? If you look at the 5-day chart, as the present administration responds to the previous government before the new one takes over, we will observe how successfully they can manage the transition. The White House has announced additional export limits on AI chips, and Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang is now in China. Recently, stock prices have dropped as a result of these adjustments. In the upcoming year, how do you see these new regulations affecting Nvidia and other semiconductor companies? It has never occurred before and is unknown. By unclear I mean that the choice concerns semiconductors designed for AI or expressly for use in AI. This implies that every gaming chip would fall under that category. They may be primarily made for gaming, but artificial intelligence is a major component of their design. 120 nations now have borders, including EU nations like Portugal and Mexico. This is not a typical situation. All of this will be handled by a government agency. Having someone like a traffic cop in the way is the worst thing I can think of for creativity, speed and earning money. We all care about national security, in my opinion, but this isn't the best course of action. I anticipate that the next administration will alter the most of the challenging aspects of this and perhaps provide some more lucid justifications. I believe that if you are confident that things will change rapidly once Trump takes office, the market's response may be too strong. The comments from CES 2025 caused a 2 or 3% decline in Nvidia's stock. Nvidia's I think decided to wait and see what the new government would do since they didn't think it was a huge concern. In light of all of this, how would these businesses handle their international connections, which they have stated are critical to their expansion? Unless the next administration cancels or delays it, they will need to engage a lot of consultants to help oversee this plan if it moves forward and begins in 120 days. Republican democracy, or bureaucracy, in office are 22 days. Industry is moving at 160,000, and a 128-page paper that is unclear is available. To deal with this circumstance, each business will have to develop its own strategy. Since many businesses don't deal with groups, they won't have any issues. However, when it comes to AI systems, businesses such as Nvidia, AMD and even Intel will need to get extremely particular about how many processors they may deliver to a given nation. The EU's response, in my opinion, is typically severe. They claim that this move is incorrect and could result in increased purchases from firms like Huawei, which is contrary to the goals of the IFR. Alright, I'm with you now. At FrontStack Global Advisors, Mark Newton serves as the Global Head of Technical Strategy. Mark, good morning, we appreciate you being here. I'm grateful, Frank. Rick Reeder just told us that the market is doing well. He thinks there's more room for development. Sayab follows the Fed. We want to look at market segments that have room to grow, but are also dealing with some difficulties. Let's begin with the S&P 500. Frank, that works. Let us examine the S&P. If it's okay with you, Mark, may I begin? We're going to go over here with a little weakness, down roughly 3.5% from the last month's S&P decline. You're stating that you're hopeful because you observe a generally positive trend? Frank, I concur. Despite all of the challenges the market has experienced, the overall longer-term trend indicates that it hasn't really broken down this year beginning last December. The reason for this is technology. 5,700 is a highly important number. Any type of consumer price index, CPI, weakening, despite the fact that trends haven't indicated it, investors should give this careful consideration. It's now negative since there has been enough deterioration. After the CPI news, do you believe the S&P 500 will rise? CPI, weakening, despite the fact that trends haven't indicated it, investors should give this careful consideration. It's now negative since there has been enough deterioration. After the CPI news, do you believe the S&P 500 will rise? Does it depend on the CPI report, or will the momentum continue to drive us in that direction even if the CPI is higher than anticipated? The reader has some fundamental concepts. Regarding technology, I have my own opinions. In the next 3 to 5 days, the markets are almost at their lowest point, according to both of them. Long-term patterns remain unchanged, feelings are a little uncomfortable now. The market has remained robust thanks to technology. That's a valid point, which is why we're likely to find substantial support there. 5,700 also indicates a longer-term increasing trend since 23, albeit it may not consistently match the lows from last November. The best moment to buy is when there is substantial backing. Feeling, in my opinion, may be a little more than a vague concept. KCHC, the VIX is, I think, at about 20 right now. The news that you anticipate a recovery in the S&P 500 will be welcomed by many index buyers. One of the most well-liked stocks on the market is the one we wish to invest in. It's in a motion picture. I was the only one looking at the numbers. Although I don't have as much experience with charts as you have, I have been examining them since CES, which is only a small portion of this chart. Since then, Nvidia has seen a decline of roughly 8%. We all thought the alligator jacket would make people more excited. It didn't, I guess. You're observing a pattern that indicates a potential video recovery is imminent. Indeed, Nvidia is still a clear winner despite the numerous challenges the semiconductor industry has faced since last July. The price has fallen back to where it appears to be a decent risk-reward scenario, much like the S&P as a whole. Although there is a short-term decline, the long-term trajectory will remain unaffected. During this downturn, investors wish to purchase. Alright, I just want to ask you a question. Nvidia is a stock of chips. These stocks are seasonal. Are you concerned that this growth may eventually halt when you look at the specifics of this stock and its current trajectory? Is that the drop? We ought to follow the stock's lead. Unfortunately, we are unable to buck the ongoing rising trends. You get it. The majority of stocks have dropped between 15 and 16% since they peaked in July of last year. The valuation of Nvidia is still on the verge of hitting its highest point. Is this his value? It appears that there has been a notable decline lately.